The hum of fluorescent lights filled the quiet corridors of Cedar Cross Hospital as nurse Rachel Thomas moved through her rounds. It was late, close to midnight, but she was used to the stillness that settled over the hospital in the early hours. The air felt thick, punctuated by the occasional beep from a monitor or the low murmur of nurses exchanging notes. Rachel found comfort in the rhythm, a familiar pattern that grounded her even on the longest shifts. Tonight, however, something felt different, as she entered the dimly lit room of a patient named Amara Jacobs. A frail elderly woman with soft, silver curls and skin dulled by illness. Rachel sensed a shadow hanging over the room. Amara had been admitted just hours earlier, brought in by paramedics after collapsing at home. Her records indicated a recent bout of pneumonia, compounded by years of untreated diabetes. Rachel noted the irregularities in her chart, the sudden, unexplained spikes in blood glucose levels, and wondered why her condition had deteriorated so quickly. She reviewed the patient's vitals, her fingers gentle but precise, noting each change with concern. "You hang in there, Ms. Jacobs," Rachel murmured softly, her voice barely a whisper. "We're gonna take good care of you." As Rachel adjusted the IV, the door opened, and Dr. Daniel Stone entered the room. Tall, with steely eyes and a crisp white coat that seemed to gleam under the hospital lights. Dr. Stone had a commanding presence. He barely acknowledged Rachel as he moved to the foot of the bed, his gaze cold as he looked over Amara's chart. "Administer another dose of insulin," he ordered, his voice clipped. Rachel hesitated. "Dr. Stone, her blood sugar is dangerously low. Another dose could put her at risk for—" He cut her off with a sharp look. "I didn't ask for your input, Nurse Thomas," he replied, dismissively. "Just follow the orders." Rachel's jaw clenched, but she kept her expression neutral. It wasn't the first time she'd seen Dr. Stone behave this way. But each incident weighed on her. She had heard rumors from other nurses about his questionable practices, especially with minority patients. Some whispered he was careless, even reckless. Others claimed he had connections so deep that his actions went unquestioned. After he left the room, Rachel glanced at Amara, whose breathing was shallow but steady. The lines around her eyes hinted at a lifetime of resilience, and Rachel felt a pang of protectiveness toward her. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Later, in the break room, Rachel found her friend and fellow nurse, Maya Perez. She pulled Maya aside, her voice low. "Maya, there's something off about Dr. Stone tonight. He ordered another insulin dose for Ms. Jacobs. I'm worried it's too much." Maya looked at her, a shadow of worry crossing her face. "I know what you mean," she replied. "He's been like this for a while. But no one says anything. You know how things work around here, Rachel. He's practically untouchable." Rachel frowned. "But what if he's making mistakes, Maya? Or worse?" Maya sighed. "I get it. I've felt the same. But no one wants to cross him. Just be careful, Rachel. This place doesn't take kindly to nurses questioning doctors. Especially Dr. Stone." Rachel nodded slowly, feeling the weight of Maya's warning settle in her chest. As she returned to the floor, the hospital's silence felt heavier, as though it, too, was holding a secret. She didn't know what lay ahead, but she knew one thing for certain: she wouldn't turn a blind eye to what was happening, no matter the cost. Rachel couldn't shake the unease that had settled over her. As she moved through her rounds, her thoughts kept drifting back to Amara Jacobs and Dr. Stone's unusual behavior. She'd always believed in the integrity of the medical profession, and she had come to Cedar Cross hoping to make a difference. But tonight, she was faced with a stark realization: some things at Cedar Cross weren't as they seemed. The next time Rachel returned to Amara's room, the patient was alone, her chest rising and falling in shallow breaths. The heart monitor displayed an erratic rhythm that made Rachel's pulse quicken. She reached for Amara's hand, feeling the coldness of her skin, a stark contrast to the warmth that had been there just an hour ago. She frowned, glancing at the IV bag. To her surprise, it had been altered, set to deliver fluids at a faster rate than she'd programmed. Rachel's training took over as she adjusted it back to a safe level. But her worry only deepened. As she checked Amara's chart, Rachel felt a presence behind her. Turning, she saw Dr. Stone in the doorway. His eyes narrowed. "What are you doing, Nurse Thomas?" he asked, his voice cold. Rachel felt a chill. "Dr. Stone, I noticed her IV rate had been increased. I was just correcting it. The adjustment seemed unsafe. He stepped further into the room, his gaze unwavering. Are you questioning my methods, nurse? Rachel took a steadying breath. I'm only concerned for Ms. Jacobs' well-being. Dr. Stone. His expression darkened. Perhaps you're in the wrong field if you can't follow basic orders. I suggest you keep your thoughts to yourself if you want to stay here. He left without another word, leaving Rachel alone with her racing thoughts and a gnawing sense of dread. Back at the nurse's station, Rachel met Maya's eyes. Something's definitely wrong. Maya, I found Amara's IV altered. And Dr. Stone was hostile when I questioned it. Maya looked around to make sure they were alone before leaning in. I've seen him do things that didn't sit right with me too. Rachel, but he's protected by administration. No one questions him. If you go after him, you'll be putting yourself on the line. Rachel felt the weight of Maya's words. But she also felt a spark of determination. If no one stands up to him, then who will? Amara's life is at stake. Maya hesitated, her eyes filled with worry. You're brave, Rachel. Just be careful. I'll support you. But this could end badly for you. As Rachel left the station, her resolve only strengthened. Dr. Stone might be powerful, but she couldn't let him harm her patients. She decided she would start gathering evidence, documenting everything she saw. If she couldn't stop him directly, she would at least make sure there was a record of his actions. Over the next few days, Rachel became a silent observer, carefully noting every detail of Dr. Stone's interactions with patients. She noticed a disturbing trend. Minority patients received less attentive care, shorter consultation times, and harsher treatment plans. She watched as he dismissed the concerns of an elderly Hispanic man with a heart condition, ignored the symptoms of a young black woman in pain, and prescribed aggressive treatments for a diabetic Native American patient, seemingly without considering their overall health. One night, she confided her findings to Maya. It's like he's targeting patients who are already vulnerable, the ones who don't have anyone to advocate for them. I don't know how deep this goes, but I have a feeling it's not just a one-time thing. Maya shook her head, a worried expression on her face. Rachel, you're risking everything. Dr. Stone has connections. If he catches wind of what you're doing. I know, Rachel said, her voice resolute. But Amara and people like her deserve better. I'm not going to turn a blind eye. Maya reached out and squeezed Rachel's hand. I'll support you, but please be careful. On a quiet night shift, Rachel returned to Amara's room for her usual checkup and found her condition worsening. Amara's blood pressure was dropping rapidly, and her breathing had become shallow and irregular. Rachel's heart pounded as she checked the IV line. This time, the medication dosage had been doubled. A cold suspicion settled over Rachel. Dr. Stone had been in the room earlier that evening, checking on Amara in private, which was unusual for him. Feeling her stomach twist with anger and fear, Rachel adjusted the dosage to a safe level and took careful notes in Amara's chart. She knew it was only a matter of time before her concerns would come to light. She couldn't keep silent much longer, not when patients' lives were in danger. That night, as she sat alone in the break room, Rachel began drafting a report, carefully detailing every incident she'd witnessed and the evidence she'd gathered. She would present it to the hospital administration. She had no other choice. If they ignored her concerns, she'd go higher. The thought of confronting Dr. Stone and his powerful allies terrified her. But she couldn't let fear control her actions. Rachel returned to her shift the next evening to find that Amara had been moved to intensive care. According to her records, Amara's blood pressure had dropped to life-threatening levels after Rachel's shift ended. Dr. Stone's notes indicated that he had administered a stronger dose of an experimental medication just hours before. Feeling the urgency of the situation, Rachel confided once more in Maya. If we don't act now, I'm afraid something terrible is going to happen to Amara. Maya nodded slowly, her face pale. Let's go to administration together. Rachel, you don't have to do this alone. Together, they prepared to file a formal complaint, one that would force the administration to investigate. As they entered the administrator's office, Rachel felt her resolve solidify. Dr. Stone's actions might have gone unchecked for years, but tonight, the truth would start to come to light. Rachel sat across from Mr. Johnson, the hospital administrator, her nerves tightly wound. She had rehearsed her words, but now, under Mr. Johnson's sharp gaze, her confidence wavered. Maya sat beside her, a steady presence, but Rachel couldn't shake the weight of what they were about to reveal. Mr. Johnson glanced over the file Rachel had brought, a heavy silence filling the room as he scanned her notes. Finally, he looked up, his face unreadable. "Nurse Thomas, this is quite an accusation," he said, his tone even. "Dr. Stone has been with this hospital for over 15 years. He's highly respected, even influential. Do you have any concrete evidence beyond what you've observed?" Rachel took a steadying breath. "I've documented everything I've seen, including changes in patient treatments that seem unexplainable. In Ms. Jacobs' case, her medications were altered several times without her consent or without informing the staff. These adjustments directly led to her decline. And I've witnessed Dr. Stone administer unsafe doses of glycerin." Maya added, "We've both seen similar patterns. It's not just one patient. There's a disturbing trend with Dr. Stone's treatment of minority patients. We believe there's a racial bias in his methods." Mr. Johnson looked between them, his brow furrowing. "These are serious accusations. Ladies, I'll have to investigate, but I hope you understand that without direct evidence, it's difficult to take action against a senior physician." Rachel's heart sank. She had hoped for a more immediate response, but she understood the need for caution. "Please, Mr. Johnson," she pleaded. "Amara Jacobs' life could be in danger. She's in critical condition, and I'm convinced Dr. Stone's actions contributed to it." After a long pause, Mr. Johnson nodded. "I'll initiate an internal investigation, but you both need to be careful. Dr. Stone has powerful allies. And these things, well, they can get complicated. For now, continue with your duties as usual. We'll be in touch." As Rachel and Maya left the office, Rachel's heart was heavy with worry. She had done all she could to alert the administration, but she feared it might not be enough. The next night, Rachel returned to the hospital to find an ominous silence hanging over the floor. Amara's condition had taken a sudden turn for the worse. She was now unresponsive, her vitals dangerously low. Rachel's pulse quickened with dread. She was certain Dr. Stone had played a role in this. As she reviewed Amara's chart, her suspicions deepened. The records indicated a routine medication change authorized by Dr. Stone, one that Rachel knew could be detrimental given Amara's fragile state. She immediately found Maya, her voice urgent. "Maya, Amara's been given another dangerous dose. We need to stop this before it's too late." Maya's face paled. "But the investigation, Mr. Johnson said they'd look into it." Rachel shook her head, her voice steady despite the fear gnawing at her. "If we wait for them, it might be too late. We have to take action ourselves." Together, they made their way to Amara's room. But as they approached, they saw Dr. Stone inside, adjusting her IV line. Rachel's heart pounded as she realized he was administering yet another dose. "Dr. Stone," Rachel called out, her voice firm, "please step away from the patient." He looked up, his eyes narrowing. "What is this, Nurse Thomas? You're interrupting my work." Rachel took a deep breath, standing her ground. "I believe your actions are endangering Ms. Jacobs' life. I've reported my concerns to Mr. Johnson, and he's initiating an investigation. Until it's complete, I request you refrain from any further treatment." Dr. Stone's face twisted with anger. "How dare you question my authority? You're nothing but a nurse. This is above your pay grade." Rachel felt a surge of courage. "My job is to protect my patients. Dr. Stone, I won't stand by and watch you harm Ms. Jacobs." He stepped closer, his voice low and threatening. "You have no idea what you're getting yourself into. This could ruin you." But Rachel held her ground, her voice unwavering. "If it means saving Ms. Jacobs and others from harm, then it's worth it." As they stared each other down, Mr. Johnson appeared in the doorway, his gaze sharp. "Dr. Stone, Nurse Thomas, a word in my office." Now, inside Mr. Johnson's office, the tension was palpable. Mr. Johnson's gaze shifted between Rachel and Dr. Stone, his expression grave. "I've reviewed your initial report, Nurse Thomas, and I have to say, I find it deeply troubling." He began, looking pointedly at Dr. Stone. "We've uncovered records of medication adjustments that are inconsistent with hospital protocols. Dr. Stone, these discrepancies need an explanation." Dr. Stone straightened, a hint of panic flashing in his eyes. "Those adjustments were made in the best interest of the patients. Sometimes, sacrifices are necessary to maintain order here." Rachel felt a chill as Dr. Stone's words sank in. Sacrifices? She repeated, horror rising in her voice. These are lives, Dr. Stone, not problems to be managed. Dr. Stone's face twisted with frustration. People like you have no idea what it takes to keep a hospital running smoothly. Sometimes difficult choices have to be made. Mr. Johnson cut in, his voice sharp. Dr. Stone, that's enough. Your actions have crossed a line. You're being placed on administrative leave pending a full investigation. As Dr. Stone was escorted out of the office, Rachel felt a wave of relief. But she also knew the fight wasn't over. She still needed to protect Amara and ensure the truth about Dr. Stone's actions came fully to light. The days that followed were filled with mixed emotions. Cedar Cross was buzzing with whispers about the investigation, and Rachel found herself in the middle of it all. Some colleagues supported her, while others distanced themselves, fearful of Dr. Stone's powerful connections. But through it all, Rachel remained focused on her duty. Amara's condition began to stabilize under the care of Dr. Chen, a compassionate and experienced doctor who took over her case. As Rachel watched Amara slowly recover, she felt a surge of hope. The battle had taken a toll, but knowing she had saved a life made every sleepless night, every confrontation, worth it. One evening, as she was finishing her shift, Rachel found Maya waiting for her by the nurse's station. I just wanted to say, you did it. Rachel, Maya said, her eyes filled with admiration. You took a stand and saved a life. Rachel smiled, the weight of the last few weeks lifting. I couldn't have done it without you. Maya, thank you for being there. As they walked out of Cedar Cross together, Rachel felt a sense of peace settle over her. The journey hadn't been easy, but she knew she'd made a difference. And in the quiet, healing light of dawn, she realized she was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. In the days following Dr. Stone's suspension, Cedar Cross Hospital was a whirlwind of rumors and tension. Rachel found herself under the scrutiny of both colleagues and superiors. Her every move watched with a mix of admiration and wariness. While many saw her as a hero, others resented her for bringing attention to the flaws within the hospital. Rachel tried to focus on her work, pouring herself into her duties and caring for patients like Amara. But the weight of what she'd done lingered in the back of her mind, along with the fear that Dr. Stone's allies would retaliate. One afternoon, while reviewing patient charts, she felt a presence behind her. Turning, she found Dr. Chen, the physician who had taken over Amara's case. Smiling warmly, Rachel, I wanted to thank you. Dr. Chen said softly, what you did took courage. And Amara's health has improved significantly under the new treatment plan. She's been asking for you. Actually, do you have a moment? Rachel's heart lifted as she followed Dr. Chen to Amara's room. Inside, she found Amara sitting up in bed, her eyes brighter than they'd been in days. Ms. Jacobs, Rachel greeted, a smile breaking across her face. It's so good to see you looking well. Amara reached for her hand, her grip surprisingly strong. Thank you, Rachel, she whispered. I remember hearing your voice, even when I was too weak to respond. You were a light in a very dark time. Rachel felt tears prick her eyes. I'm just glad you're feeling better. You've been through so much. Amara gave her hand a squeeze. No, my dear, you're the one who went through the storm for me. I can't thank you enough. As Rachel left Amara's room, her heart full, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. But her peace was short-lived. That evening, while organizing medical supplies, she received a call to the administrator's office. When she arrived, she was surprised to find Mr. Johnson waiting, his face grave, along with Dr. Spencer, a high-ranking board member who had always been a close ally of Dr. Stone. Rachel, Mr. Johnson began, his tone tense. We're currently reviewing additional complaints from Dr. Stone's supporters. They claim you overstepped your role, disrupted patient care, and acted unprofessionally. Rachel felt her stomach twist, but she kept her voice calm. I acted in the best interest of the patient. Sir, every decision I made was to ensure Ms. Jacobs' safety. Dr. Spencer leaned forward, his voice cold. Your actions brought unwanted attention to this hospital. Nurse Thomas, Dr. Stone has been a pillar of Cedar Cross, and some believe you misinterpreted his treatment choices. Are you certain you acted solely out of concern for the patient? Or were there other motivations? Rachel met his gaze with a steady resolve. My only motivation was to protect my patient. Dr. Spencer, I stand by my actions. The men exchanged a glance before Mr. Johnson spoke again. "We're continuing our investigation. For now, I suggest you remain cautious and focused on your duties. We'll let you know if further action is necessary." As she left the office, Rachel felt a mixture of anger and frustration. She had done everything to protect her patients. Yet here she was, facing retaliation from those who wanted to sweep Dr. Stone's actions under the rug. Later that evening, as Rachel was gathering her things to leave, she was surprised to see Dr. Harris, a senior surgeon with a reputation for being distant, waiting by her locker. "Rachel," he began, his voice softer than usual. "I heard what happened with Dr. Stone. I wanted to let you know that not everyone here disapproves of your actions. I admire what you did. It's rare to see someone with that kind of integrity." Rachel looked at him, surprised. "Thank you, Dr. Harris. That means a lot coming from you." He gave a small nod. "If there's anything I can do to help, don't hesitate to ask. This hospital needs people like you, Rachel, people who aren't afraid to do the right thing." She felt a spark of hope. For the first time, she realized she wasn't entirely alone in her fight. Dr. Harris' support gave her the courage she needed to keep going, even as the pressure mounted. A few days later, as Rachel was finishing her rounds, she received an unexpected message to meet with Mr. Johnson again. When she entered the office, she found Mr. Johnson, Dr. Spencer, and, to her shock, Drive Stone, seated across the table, a smirk on his face. "Rachel," Mr. Johnson began, his tone heavy, "Dr. Stone has filed a formal complaint against you, claiming you acted recklessly and damaged his reputation. He's requesting that we review your position at Cedar Cross." Dr. Stone leaned forward, his eyes gleaming with a predatory satisfaction. "You're nothing but a disruptive force. Nurse Thomas, you had no right to question my expertise." Rachel felt her pulse quicken, but she forced herself to remain calm. "I did what I had to do to protect my patients. You were endangering Ms. Jacobs' life, and I couldn't stand by and let that happen." Dr. Spencer's eyes narrowed. "Dr. Stone's treatment methods have always been effective. Do you have any real proof beyond your personal concerns?" Rachel? Taking a deep breath, Rachel produced her notes, as well as testimony from Maya and Dr. Chen, who had also observed Dr. Stone's questionable practices. Mr. Johnson reviewed the documents in silence, his expression unreadable. Finally, he looked up, his gaze sharp. "Dr. Stone, it appears we have multiple testimonies here regarding your recent actions. We'll be conducting a more thorough investigation into your practices." Dr. Stone's face contorted with anger, but he said nothing. As Rachel watched him, she knew that, no matter what, she had done the right thing. The weeks that followed were tense, but Rachel held her ground, supported by the few allies she'd made. Dr. Stone was eventually suspended pending a full review, and the truth about his practices began to emerge. Cedar Cross Hospital was forced to confront the discrimination that had been festering in its halls, and policies were put in place to ensure patients received fair and equal treatment. Rachel's reputation had taken a hit, but she was content. She had stood up for Amara and every other patient who had suffered in silence. One evening, as she was leaving the hospital, she spotted Amara, now fully recovered, walking toward her with her family. Amara hugged Rachel, tears in her eyes. "Thank you, Rachel. Because of you, I have a second chance." Rachel smiled, feeling a sense of peace. "I just did what was right. You're a fighter, Amara. I'm glad you're well." As she watched Amara walk away, Rachel knew that, despite the challenges, she would continue to be a voice for those who needed one. She had found her true calling, not just as a nurse, but as an advocate for justice. The path ahead might not be easy, but Rachel was ready to face it, with courage and conviction guiding her every step. Months had passed since Dr. Stone's suspension, but the impact of his actions, and Rachel's brave stand, continued to ripple through Cedar Cross Hospital. The hospital administration, initially reluctant to act, had launched a series of reforms. New policies and protocols were established to prevent racial bias and to ensure transparency in patient treatment. Rachel, though still feeling the weight of her decision, noticed a shift in the hospital's atmosphere. Staff members began to acknowledge her as they passed by, some with looks of respect, others with cautious admiration. Word of her courage had spread, and more nurses and doctors approached her, sharing their own concerns and stories. A sense of community was beginning to form. with Rachel at the center. A reminder that one person's courage could bring about real change. One morning, while reviewing her patient's charts, Rachel noticed a familiar name, Drive Harris. She felt a surge of gratitude as she recalled his support during those dark days. He had been a quiet, unwavering ally when she'd felt most alone. His name was now listed as the new head of a committee focused on ethical patient care, a role he had taken on in the wake of Dr. Stone's departure. Rachel was deep in thought when Maya entered the break room, grinning as she approached. "Rachel, guess what? They're hosting a staff appreciation event next week. And I heard your name mentioned as a special guest." Rachel laughed, feeling a tinge of embarrassment. "Me? I was half expecting them to ignore me for stirring up so much trouble." "Trouble?" Maya chuckled, nudging her friend's arm. "You saved lives. Rachel, you did what others were too afraid to do. People are finally starting to see that." Rachel looked down, a modest smile crossing her face. "I guess, but it's been tough. I still wonder if I could have handled things differently." Maya shook her head. "You did what was right, Rachel. And now, because of you, patients like Amara are safe. And Cedar Cross is a better place." The night of the staff appreciation event arrived, and Rachel found herself standing in a crowd of familiar faces. She was surrounded by doctors, nurses, and staff members who had witnessed her journey, many of whom she barely knew but who now looked at her with respect and admiration. As the event continued, Mr. Johnson took the stage, clearing his throat. "Tonight, we honor our staff for their dedication and courage, especially those who have gone above and beyond for their patients. One of our nurses has shown remarkable bravery, standing up for what's right, even when it was difficult." The audience turned to Rachel, their applause warm and heartfelt. Rachel felt her cheeks flush as she rose to accept the recognition, grateful for the support that surrounded her. As she left the stage, she spotted Amara Jacobs sitting in the crowd, her eyes shining with pride. Amara made her way over, her steps steady as she took Rachel's hands in hers. "I had to come tonight, Rachel," Amara said, her voice thick with emotion. "Because of you, I got to watch my granddaughter graduate. I got to see my family grow. I got a second chance at life." Rachel felt tears well up in her eyes. "I'm so glad you're well, Amara. That's all that matters to me." Amara smiled, her expression full of warmth. "You've given me hope, Rachel, and not just for myself. Hope that people like you will keep standing up for what's right, no matter the cost." In the days that followed, Rachel continued her work with a renewed sense of purpose. She joined Dr. Harris' new ethics committee, helping to design protocols that would promote fair and equal treatment for all patients. Her role as an advocate grew, and she became known as a leader not just within the nursing staff, but across the entire hospital. One evening, as she was preparing to leave, she found herself once again in the break room with Maya. The two friends shared a comfortable silence, reflecting on how far they'd come since those first tense days. "So, what's next for you, Rachel?" Maya asked, a glint of curiosity in her eyes. "You've already shaken up Cedar Cross pretty well." Rachel chuckled. "I think there's plenty of work left to do here. But maybe someday, I'll consider teaching, or training other nurses to be advocates for their patients. I want to make sure that people like Dr. Stone never have unchecked power again." Maya grinned. "I think you'd be amazing at that. You've already changed this hospital. Who knows how many lives you'll impact if you teach others." Rachel felt a sense of fulfillment wash over her. She had faced darkness, but she had come through stronger, with a sense of purpose that was clearer than ever. The journey had been difficult, but she had proven to herself, and to others, that one person's courage could make a difference. As she looked out over the quiet, dimly lit halls of Cedar Cross, Rachel felt a deep peace settle in her heart. She knew there would be more challenges ahead, but she was ready to face them. She was a nurse, an advocate, and now, a voice for justice. And she was exactly where she was meant to be. Months after Dr. Stone's dismissal, the atmosphere at Cedar Cross had transformed. Nurses and doctors alike felt more empowered to speak up, knowing that their voices could make a difference. Rachel noticed that her fellow staff members were more open, discussing cases and sharing concerns without the lingering fear of reprisal. Her actions had sparked a quiet revolution within the hospital, a ripple effect that encouraged others to prioritize compassion and integrity. One afternoon, while on a break, Rachel received an unexpected email from Dr. Harris. She opened it, surprised to see an invitation to speak at a conference on ethical practices in healthcare. The email outlined how her experience could provide valuable insights for medical professionals nationwide. Rachel stared at the invitation, her heart racing with excitement and nerves. She hadn't expected her story to extend beyond Cedar Cross, but this opportunity felt like a natural continuation of the mission she had embraced. After her shift, she shared the news with Maya, who practically squealed with delight. "Rachel, this is incredible. You're going to inspire so many people." Rachel smiled, though a hint of anxiety clouded her excitement. "It's a bit overwhelming, honestly, but if sharing my experience can help prevent situations like Dr. Stone's elsewhere, then it's worth it. You've already made such a difference here," Maya said, giving her a reassuring look. "Imagine the lives you'll impact if you share your story on a bigger platform." With Maya's encouragement, Rachel decided to accept the invitation. She began to prepare, gathering her notes and reflecting on the journey that had led her here. A few weeks later, Rachel found herself standing in front of a packed conference hall filled with healthcare professionals from all over the country. The audience watched her expectantly, waiting to hear her story. Rachel took a deep breath, steadying her nerves before stepping up to the podium. "Good afternoon," she began, her voice strong despite the butterflies in her stomach. "My name is Rachel Thomas, and I'm a nurse from Cedar Cross Hospital. I'm here today to talk about a topic that's vital to all of us: advocacy for our patients and the courage to stand up when we see something wrong, even when it's difficult." Rachel recounted her experiences, from her growing suspicions of Dr. Stone's practices to the struggle she'd faced in exposing the truth. She spoke of Amara Jacobs, the patient whose life she had fought to protect, and the support she'd received from colleagues like Maya and Dr. Harris. She shared the lessons she'd learned and emphasized the importance of listening to one's intuition and prioritizing patient well-being above all else. By the time she finished, the room was silent, her words hanging in the air. Rachel looked out over the crowd, her heart swelling with pride as she saw people nodding, some wiping away tears, others deep in thought. As the applause erupted, Rachel felt a sense of fulfillment she hadn't known was possible. She had shared her story, and now, it belonged to the world, a testament to the power of courage, compassion, and justice. After the conference, Rachel was approached by numerous attendees, each thanking her for her courage and sharing their own stories of challenges and ethical dilemmas. Among them was a young nurse who introduced herself as Lily Chen. "I just wanted to say how much your story meant to me," Lily said, her voice wavering. "I've been in similar situations where I felt powerless to stand up. Hearing what you went through, and how you fought for your patient, has given me the courage to be a better advocate." Rachel smiled, squeezing Lily's hand. "Thank you, Lily. Just remember, even if you're the only voice, it still matters. Always trust your instincts and know that what you do makes a difference." After returning to Cedar Cross, Rachel found herself energized by her experience at the conference. She began leading workshops for her colleagues, training new nurses on patient advocacy, and discussing how to handle ethical dilemmas. Her story had resonated with so many people, and she was determined to use her voice to empower others. The hospital administration even recognized her as a valuable asset, enlisting her to help develop guidelines to prevent incidents like Dr. Stone's from happening again. Her influence grew, and soon, other hospitals reached out to consult her expertise on ethical patient care and integrity in healthcare. One evening, as Rachel finished her shift, she was surprised to see a familiar face waiting for her in the hospital lobby: Amara Jacobs. Accompanied by her granddaughter, Amara smiled, her eyes twinkling with gratitude. "Rachel, I heard you've been speaking out, sharing our story. I wanted to thank you for everything." Rachel's heart warmed as she hugged Amara, her voice soft with emotion. "I should be thanking you, Ms. Jacobs. Meeting you changed my life. You reminded me why I became a nurse." Amara's granddaughter, a young woman named Sarah, spoke up, her eyes filled with admiration. "Ms. Thomas, my grandma has told me so much about you. Because of you, I've decided to apply to nursing school. I want to help people the way you helped her." Rachel felt tears well up, her heart swelling with pride. "Sarah, that's wonderful. Nursing is a calling, it's hard work, but it's worth every moment. Just remember to always listen to your heart and advocate for what's right." As she watched Amara and Sarah walk away, Rachel felt a deep sense of fulfillment. The journey had been difficult, full of challenges and sacrifices, but the impact she had made was undeniable. Years later, Rachel's story had become a beacon of inspiration for nurses and healthcare workers across the nation. Her workshops evolved into a program that trained medical staff in ethical patient care and advocacy. With Rachel herself leading sessions in hospitals around the country, Cedar Cross had embraced a culture of transparency and integrity. With Rachel at the heart of the change, Amara's health had continued to improve, and her family often kept in touch with Rachel, sending her updates and holiday cards. Sarah, now a registered nurse, often sought Rachel's advice and guidance. They shared a special bond, one forged in courage and a shared dedication to protecting those in need. Rachel's legacy grew, reaching beyond Cedar Cross and into the lives of healthcare workers who would go on to advocate for patients in hospitals, clinics, and medical centers around the country. Her journey had proven that, sometimes, one voice could spark a movement and change an entire system. As Rachel looked back on her life, she felt a profound sense of gratitude. She had dedicated herself to the service of others, and her legacy was one of courage, compassion, and unyielding commitment to justice. Her impact would be felt for generations. Her story a reminder that true change often starts with a single, brave voice. And as she stood in the quiet halls of Cedar Cross Hospital one last time, Rachel knew that her journey, though challenging, had been worth every step. She had lived a life filled with purpose, surrounded by people who believed in her, and had left the world a better place. With a peaceful smile, she turned and walked out of Cedar Cross, ready to embrace the future, confident in the knowledge that her work would continue through those she had inspired.